Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. You can see here I've got a pretty dark piece of Coober Pedy Opal. If you have a look at that body tone, it is definitely a grey. It's not a black opal. You can get it in Coober Pedy, but it's pretty rare, and this is a pretty good example of a more medium tone. Definitely not white, but definitely not black. And if you have a look in this little nicked out area, we've got a red bar going across there, but being a seam opal, it's a little bit covered, and you can see the bar is over here, but it's not the same bar. So if I go over here, you can see there's one diagonal one across here, one diagonal one across there. How do we choose which one's best? We're going to have to tackle this like we tackle any kind of seam opal, and that is we need to see all the way around the bar. So we're going to grind it all back. Use the sintered diamond burrs for that. It'll be not a problem at all. And then from there, we'll reassess and work out which bar we want to go for and work out which face we want to go for. Who knows, we could get lucky, we could get both of these bars and get a double-sided stone. But you really can't decide anything until you see the entire colour bar, so let's spin up. And away we go, bringing out the big guns. The powerhouse burr, the 80 grits into diamond. This thing can shift opal real quick. So we're just going to get through all this outer crusty rusty just to be able to see the colour bar. And you can see there, this is sped up footage, of course, I am not a machine. But this is really quick, so it doesn't take very long at all, just a minute or so. And then we'll be able to see the entire colour bar, and we just want to bring in all the edges as well. Anywhere you don't see anything, just keep bringing it in until you do hit that colour bar, because there's no point keeping it if there's no colour anyway. You don't need to be too worried, but be careful of all the chipping. Definitely wear safety glasses if you're not using a screen. And then here we'll just have a quick look around the edge of the stone. The colour bar is a bit of a weird one. It just dips and weaves on one side and peters out pretty hard, which is a little annoying, but at least we can see the entire bar so you can make an informed decision which way to go for the face and the back. So we've decided on this being the face, and we'll just grind straight through it. Nothing special about this. You just let the 80 grit do the work. It'll get through in no time at all, and you'll end up just being able to get to this stage where you just dip it in the water, wipe it off, and you should see the colour just peeking through. Here I haven't shaped the stone at all, so it's a pretty ugly shape, but you can see where the colour's coming through. And at this point, I would typically switch over to the 600, but I've noticed that this edge doesn't have a lot of colour, and it's not a very symmetric or a very good looking shape for a stone, so we're going to bring that edge in all the way until we get to this, a bit more of an even triangle. And then this is the back, I'm just going to work on that. If you ever see this coral looking part of a stone, you'll be able to grind through it pretty quickly, but be careful, it can be very fragile. Again, you can see on my thumb there's some of the chips and little bits of rock that have come off. It does spit a lot when you're using an 80 grits into diamond, and it comes off at a pretty fast rate, so yeah, just be careful. But at the same time, you can get through it pretty quickly, and you'll get to a stage where you've got a preformed shape. Now at this point, you definitely want to switch to the 600 grits into diamonds, but me, I'm torture testing these resin burrs, and you can see here, really sharp serrated edge. Never do this with a Nova point, it will kill them instantly. It'll deform them like you wouldn't believe. But here, I just wanted to torture test these ones and really put it up against it, and the hard resin, it actually survives. It survives even the most ridiculous edges. This one I've intentionally left very rough with that 80 grits into diamond rather than going to the 600, which I would normally do, just to test this and see how it would go. And it does not care at all. I did not notice any deformation of the burr. You can see it's wearing down, which is perfectly fine. It wears down into this like muddy diamond paste kind of consistency, which I think is actually good to keep on the stone, but we'll talk about that again later. And we just want to hit the entire surface of the stone with this one, just buzz all the way through, get a nice even finish on it. Well, not a finish, but make sure it's all at this stage, because the 80 grits into diamond is a very rough piece. And we're even going to do a little bit of the minor edging, just get the shape locked in, though we do a little bit of this with the 800 grit as well, because it too removes quite a bit of material quite quickly. But with the 400, I think this is the point where you want to finish up the shaping. And then, because I stuffed up the last carving so epically by not knowing how to use these burrs and not adjusting to them quick enough, here I've gone all the way back to basics, painted the entire stone with a permanent marker, and then we've switched over to the 800 grit And we're just going to make sure the entire stone is at minimum up to the 800 grit standard. You can see the 800 does buzz through incredibly quickly. The texture is not standing a chance at all. It's disappearing very rapidly. But you do want to make sure that you get through it all and just keep dipping it in the water, keep washing it off. And then really, you have to be very critical on yourself here. You have to make sure, don't convince yourself that all the texture is gone or the permanent marker. All those tiny little spots, they need to go. You can't just ignore them. You have to get through the entire thing till it looks like this, and that's when you're ready to go to the next stage. We're going to switch over to the 1500 burr, the hard resin again, and just go through the entire thing. There is no reason why you can't chuck the permanent marker across it all and paint the entire face and sides and back if you want. Just do it as many times as you need to. I'm pretty confident that I've got there. But then I switch over to the 3000, and this is where I notice the first problem I have in these burrs. Look at the surface. Now these burrs normally grind away, and yes, this burr is a little bit grey blackish, but look at the stone. This is actually starting to stain the stone. This I can't just wash off. With all the other grinding of the burrs, all of that deposit, you just wash it off. You just rub it off with your thumb, you wash it off, but look at this. This is actually staining the stone a very grey colour. Even though it's meant to now be at a bit of a pre-polish, it almost feels like it's gone backwards. And it's left a staining, which would just be the depositing of that in any of the imperfections. But it seems even more than that. It looks like it's actually staining the surface quite a bit. So this is not what I would expect a 3000 grit finish to end up like. And you can see there's some sections where the staining is worse than others, but overall you can see it across the entire face. Here I very optimistically wipe it off with my finger and it does absolutely nothing. Pretty sad. So I don't do anything about it. I don't want to go backwards, so I'm just going to see if the super serum oxide will save the day, and thankfully enough, of course it does. It managed to get rid of all that staining and get to a final polished stone, which I was incredibly happy with. This stuff never disappoints me, and you'll see why in a second. Let's have a look at the final stone. Well, that's that, and I've got to say, I am incredibly excited. These burrs, they actually work. I've still got a few issues, and I've still got a few things to test with them. Mostly just optimizing it, but before we look at those, we'll just have a quick look at the stone. Not as good as I thought it was. The bar over this side kind of peters out, so we took a lot of that edge in just to make it a little bit more symmetrical. Make it kind of like a bit of a, I don't know, square bottomed teardrop kind of shape. Pretty much just a triangle. And it's got a fair bit of color in it, but it's a little bit directional, a little bit shy. And of course, if we flip it over, the back does not look great. I'm thinking of making this one into a doublet and just chucking that on the flat lap just to grind it back a little bit and then thickening it out. It's a very big stone, so at this kind of size, once it starts getting this thin, it's a little bit fragile and I'm not a huge fan of that. So probably going to chuck it on a backing and do a nice doublet piece out of this. It might just bring it to life a little bit more as well. Then it'd be a very big, very good pendant stone. And we got a nice finish on it, but of course we had a little bit of trouble. So let's have a look at the trouble. I'll just chuck it in the water for a sec just so we can magnify some of the color and you can look at it. Twinkle, 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 twinkle. Not bad. We'll leave it in there and move that to the side. So this little guy I am not overly happy with. So in that footage earlier you could see, and I tried to point it out, it left a little bit of staining. Now the staining came out fine with the cerium oxide, so not a huge problem, but I was hoping that this burr would get to a point where it was pretty much finished. I'll have to test it out on something more porous, like a bit of matrix or maybe just some boulder opal to see if it absolutely stains the hell out of it, because there it will be a lot harder to clean out. Not happy, Jan. I don't actually know if I'm gonna need this burr anyway. We're gonna try to do a 1500 and then go from the 1500 through to the cerium oxide and see if that gets the same finish. I'm also not that certain about the really coarse grit burrs. So here they are, and I put them in a very terrible situation that I would never do to the Novas. I went from the 80 grit sintered diamond, this evil little fella right here. So I went from this directly through to here and really put this to the test, hitting it against the most serrated, chippy edges of an opal ever, and it did cop a lot of punishment, and it's come out on the other side pretty good, not as deformed as I thought. You could see that this one was wearing out real quick, this one was wearing real quick, but they're massive burrs compared to the large novas. They're the same diameter, but they're a different length, so they're a lot bigger and they should last a lot longer. Because even those low grit novas, they wear really quickly as well, especially when you're looking below 280. So I'm not overly worried about that, but I'm thinking I might get away with not using these two, and instead of going from the 80 grit, which is a silly move, when you get this kit, you can go from 80 all the way through to 600. If you have to start with the 80, at least jump somewhere in the middle or just go to the 600 and let it do a bit of work. I think I can go and do a normal carving with the sinteds, stop at the 600, and then maybe jump all the way across to the 800. I always said the 280 Nova, the black Nova, this guy just here, I always said this was my favorite Nova point. In terms of the harder resin burrs, I think the 800 is king. I think the 800 is the superstar. It should be able to do everything that the 280 all the way through to about the 600 or maybe even the 1200 can do with the Nova points. This one can bridge that gap, and then we can go one step further just to get to a pre-polish stage and then possibly skip him and go cerium oxide. I am hoping that my testing will show that I can get away with just using these on a standard carving where I'm using sintered diamonds and a metal oxide to finish. Now these guys here might be much better in a lot of other cases and they might come in handy. So if I was to make a full kit right now, I think I'm gonna ditch this staining burr. I don't know what caused the staining. It didn't happen on the last stone I did, but maybe I just didn't notice it so much because it was a black opal. On the white, I could clearly see it, and I think I could have just stopped here and just moved straight onto the oxide polish. So that's some more testing I've got to do. The other thing I'll just mention is that the way these wear, they wear and they act a lot like diamond paste. If you've used diamond paste, so I'm thinking when you're grinding away and this is wearing out and you're seeing that deposit on the stone, maybe don't immediately wash it off. Just dab a little bit of water on it or dip this one in the water and then just keep going at it, because I think it's actually quite useful to keep it on the face of the stone when you're trying to do that carving and polishing. Just something to consider, something I'm going to keep an eye out on with the rest of my testing. But all in all, these things are, I think, going to take over for me. I don't know if I'll be needing to stock Nova points from the US. I'll do it in the store anyway, because it is a tried and tested brand and they do certainly work. They've worked for a lot of people for a long time. But for me, the speed of these is a lot quicker. I think these two can slot in and do exactly what I needed those Novas for. So I'm going to do some more testing, but I'm certainly talking to the factory and we are getting them stocked, at least these 4. Holding on this guy for now. Only really going to be useful if this won't transition straight to a cerium oxide, or if it's really useful on something like a boulder opal where sometimes I don't use a metal oxide on a really porous one. Maybe even the Ethiopian opal, that's probably the best place to test this to see if it does that staining again, because I don't use metal oxide polishing on the Ethiopian opals. That's the only reason I'd end up with this one. But more testing. In science, the proof of concept stage is really exciting, and so I've just about hit that point where I've proven it to work well enough for me, and if it works well enough for me, it'll work well enough for a lot of people. Hope this was a good learning experience for you guys, because it certainly was for me. And with this success, hopefully a lot more to come for all of us. So catch you later guys, back to carving.